Here's a look at the University of Illinois Press.
Welcome. My name is Julie Lout, and I'm Outreach and Development Coordinator at the University of Illinois Press. On behalf of our director, Lori Matheson, and our entire staff, I want to thank you all for being here today as part of this remarkable event. As you know, the Press is turning 100 this year, and this month we have partnered with the U of I Library in order to kick off a year filled with workshops, panels, exhibits, and more. Today's panel is a particularly important one. Lori Matheson, our current director, is joined by her two predecessors in that position, Willis Regier and Richard Wentworth. To add some historical context to this event, I will share with you that the University of Illinois Press has had only 6 directors in its 100 years, and only 4 of those served in a full-time capacity. So the reflections that we hear today encompass nearly 50 years of the Press's history. It is my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's panel, Dr. James D. Anderson. I'll stand on this maybe. Dr. Anderson currently serves as the Dean of the School of Education. He has held other key leadership roles during his nearly 50-year tenure at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, including serving as the head of the Department of Education Policy, Organization, and Leadership. Dr. Anderson was selected in 2016 as a U of I Presidential Fellow and is known internationally as a groundbreaking scholar in the history of African American education and school achievement in the U.S. He is a member of the National Academy of Education and is a Good School Professor of History of American Education, an endowed professorship bestowed upon the most distinguished senior faculty members on this campus. Dr. Anderson has also served on the faculty board of the University of Illinois Press during each of the tenures of our panelists today, and we thank him for being here to lead us through these reflections of the University of Illinois Press at 100.
Thank you. How many years did you say? I think I need to clarify that. When I look at the 3 editors, I've been on campus during the whole time period, except I was a student when Dick Wentworth became in 1970. And I have to clarify that because I have colleagues who think that I was actually on the faculty. But I was a student then, and I was on the faculty in 1978 when he became the director of the U of I Press. And in fact, for me, that was the year of my first publication, which was published by the U of I Press, and a book chapter in a volume at that time. And so I was very grateful for that. I won't give you the reference because, as always the case, you look back on that and you say, I wouldn't have accepted that for publication. But I am grateful to Dick Wentworth for doing so. Anyway, Richard Wentworth was born in New Hampshire, but graduated from the University of Oklahoma. And I, of course, wondering, how did you get from New Hampshire to Oklahoma? I'm assuming that the Air Force had something to do with it.
Yeah.
He served in the Air Force for 4 years. And then after a 1-year internship at the University of Oklahoma Press, he spent 1 year at the University of Wisconsin Press, and then spent 10 years at Louisiana State University Press. And I actually knew of him then because as a student, that was my favorite press to order books from then because of his work in Southern and African American history. And then came to U of I in 1970 as associate director, and then became director of U of I Press in 1978 and served in that capacity until 2000, followed by 4 years as a part-time editor. Willis Regier received his PhD in American Lit and American and English Lit from the University of Nebraska, and then joined the University of Nebraska Press. And I was thinking they were both in what we then called the Big Eight.
That's right.
Today, people actually think that Alabama and Auburn are the game of the year. Back then, it was Nebraska and Oklahoma.
Yeah.
Hands down. There was no comparison. But anyway, he went on to become director of Johns Hopkins University Press from 1995 until 1998, before becoming director at Illinois in November of 1998. He retired as director in 2015. He's the author of 3 books, Book of Finks, in Praise of Flattery and Quotology, and these were published in 2004, 2007, and 2010. And now teaches in the university OLLI, these acronyms. What's OLLI?
Osher Lifelong Learning Institute.
Okay. Program, and pursues research on Erasmus and Renaissance humanism. And I should point out also, in connection with Dick Wentworth, that back on the faculty, I ended up being a member of the dissertation committee of his spouse, Marlene. She did her work on on Cobley. And it was a really wonderful dissertation to be a part of. So we have various kinds of connections. And
everybody has a doctorate except me.
Laura Matheson is the director and music acquisitions editor of the University of Illinois Press. Since arriving at the press in 1996, she has served as editor-in-chief, acquisitions editor, marketing copywriter, and awards manager, among other roles. She has acquired award-winning books in a variety of fields, including labor history, women's history, folklore, and Appalachian studies, as well as music. Matheson holds a doctorate in music from the University of Illinois and is active as a choir director, organist, singer, and composer, with recent appearances at the Newberry Library, Illinois State University, and the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. And so we'll proceed with each of the editors, starting with Dick, to talk about their tenure as editor of the press, and after that we will have questions.
Yeah, we've got some talking points, I think, too.
Some talking points,
Yeah.
Okay. So, Dick, the floor is yours.
Okay. I moved from Louisiana to this frozen Northland in January of 1970, and the weather was a shock, but so was the condition of the press list. The previous editor, Donald Jackson, had been gone for almost 2 years, and the director, Miodrag Munchin, had had a heart attack and on doctor's orders was working short days. He had his hands full, at any rate, supervising the printing division, which was then under the University Press director, and dealing with the Illinois test of psycholinguistic abilities, which brought in half of the press income. When I came here, that was the critical thing. It's a $100 package with a lot of pieces to be purchased over and over, and that brought in a lot of money to the press. The faculty committee, the University Press Board, noted the problem about manuscripts not coming in and took it on themselves to find an editor. I got a call from George Hendrick, a member of the committee, inquiring whether my assistant director at LSU, Charles East, might be interested in applying for the job. And I told him Charles was a Southerner who was going to stay in the South, but that I might be interested. I had a growing family and was a bit concerned about my kids growing up in the South, but the main reason I was interested in making a change was that we were housed in an old library building that was not air-conditioned, and I had a perennially grousing staff. I interviewed with the faculty committee and was offered the job. On arrival, I started contacting some of my LSU authors and told them if they had colleagues or grad students with manuscripts coming along, they should submit them to Illinois because the cupboard was bare. I thought it important to try to develop areas of concentration in which the press might ultimately excel, and it was obvious that I should think first of subject areas I knew best. One of these was African American history. The major thrust of the LSU list was Southern history, which to a large extent is African American history. To get a start, I brought with me from Baton Rouge what became a 14-volume Papers of Booker T. Washington and a manuscript on race relations in Mississippi, both of which my successor, Charles East, was willing to see go. He had the Jefferson Davis papers, and 2 big paper projects would be too much. Then I started a series in Black history with August Meyer, one of the 2 leading scholars in this subject area. I had been talking to him about this at LSU, and he was willing to switch to Illinois along with his friends, the editors of the Booker T. Washington series. As the Black History series developed, we published a book by Herbert Gutman, who was the author of a major book on the Black family. I'm sure you know it well. Gutman had published a long critique of a book on the economics of slavery in an African American journal. I suggested that we publish this as a book and put a New Yorker cartoon on the cover in which a slave was told not to be too concerned because historians would show that his life was not all that rough after all. This little book led to one of the press's most important areas of specialization. Gutman asked if Illinois would be interested in starting a series on labor and working class history, which he thought the 2 leading scholars in the field, David Montgomery and David Brody, would edit with him. I jumped at the chance. Within 2 years, we added what were very successful series in women's history and immigration history. I think it is safe to say that in the 80s and 90s, Illinois was the leading publisher of American social history. Meanwhile, we continued to publish in clusters, establishing series and areas of specialization: communication, Lincoln and Illinois; American music with Judy McCullough; Mormon history and Western history with Liz Delaney; short fiction with Ann Weir; poetry with Larry Lieberman of the English department; sports history with Larry Malley, and practically everything focused on the U.S. By the end of the century, when it was time for me to get out of the way, it was past time, for someone to come in and broaden the horizon.
Dick and I actually disagree about when I came. But let me just say, for fact or fiction, that I think it was November of 1998. And from there through July 2015, it was clear to me that my first priority was continuity, preserving the strengths that Dick had established. My last concern was also continuity, leaving the press solvent and well-staffed. Happily for continuity, Dick continued to work as an acquisitions editor part-time until 2004, concentrating in particular on the sports history list. That athletic list is now kept active and in shape by Danny Nassett. And I am still grateful that Dick stayed around those extra years. Because in 1998, when I think I began, the press had 4 full-time and 1 part-time acquisitions editors plus Dick. But Dick was acquiring 40% of the new manuscripts. That disproportion could not continue. The second problem was the press's lack of any expertise in digital publishing. To rectify both problems, acquisitions and digital publishing, I converted one acquisitions position into an electronic publisher position and hired Paul Arroyo And to manage all things IT, Louis Mesker. Paul and Louis, two of the press's most admired and beloved members then and now. They enabled us to add digital publishing to our capacity. A step, no, a leap, vital for our journals immediately, and eventually for books too. One of the smartest things I ever did was to give Judy McCullough the freedom to expand her American music list, which was another list begun by Dick. Judy built the music list into the best on the continent, and Lori now directs that series with a skill like Ormandy or Zell. I took advantage of the retirement of another editor to hire Joan Catapano from Indiana University Press. Joan was an acquisitions powerhouse. She took on the press's Women's Studies and African American Studies lists, both begun by Dick. Both now thrive thanks to Don Durante. Joan took on most of the history list too, and added a foundational film studies list, now managed by Danny Nassett. My third challenge was to make our list more international. Dick had created an ensemble of American studies that were the envy of other university presses. Lists in American music, American immigration, American labor, American sports, and so on. And I wanted to keep all that alive and do more. I added translations from French, German, Spanish, and Latin American authors, and expanded the music list to include Bach studies and the Beethoven sketchbook series edited by William Kinderman. I added series on food studies and science fiction, series that Marika Christofides now keeps healthy and imaginative. The fourth and most serious problem of my tenure was the rapid consolidation of the publishing industry. Consolidation affected every part of our work, from acquisition of books and journals through production, distribution, and sales. We had to fend off rival presses and behemoth commercial publishers of academic journals who were making big promises to journal editors, promises that ended up doubling and trebling the prices for subscribers, most of them libraries facing challenges of their own. Our journals managers, Ann Lowry and Clydette Wantland, fought off that competition successfully, very successfully, and built the Illinois Journals program into one of the very best in the country. In the 1990s, Barnes & Noble and Borders drove the smaller bookstores out of business, and soon those two had to fend off an even larger competitor, Amazon, the world's largest bookstore. Amazon became our largest customer by a wide margin, and Amazon threw its weight around like the giant it is, making demands about shipping, billing, and discounts that demanded close attention and the gritting of teeth. At the same time, libraries consolidated. Small and mid-sized libraries ceased to buy copies of our books and instead relied on interlibrary loan from the decreasing number of libraries that did buy them. In those years, libraries centralized, digitized, and cut budgets for books. And in a few years, a very few years, the major libraries of this country, like Illinois, utterly altered the structure and economy of scholarly publishing. Then came the recession of 2008. More bookstores closed. Borders went bankrupt. The university suffered annual budget cuts, sometimes semi-annual budget cuts. Since the press is technically an administrative unit, and administration is always the biggest and the first target to be cut when budgets are cut, it was expected that the press would accept a bigger cut than the colleges. I had to cut personnel and to fend off even other cuts, the ugly stuff a director must do. As the press climbed out of the recession, I relied heavily on the press's chief financial officer, Alice Ennis, to watch the business end of things. The press shed journals and book series that we could no longer afford to support. We lost staff. But even so, the press maintained its core strengths and got stronger, and added smart and able young people in every department. I'm looking at you. The fifth difficulty was administrative, working with a sequence of 6 different chancellors, reporting to 5 different vice presidents, some a good deal better than others, and adapting to the university's new operating system, dealing with hiring freezes and budget cuts, and accommodating new rules and frequent policy changes. The press managers, Clydette, Jennifer Comeau, Chris Ding, Michael Rue, and my assistant, Kathy O'Neill, helped me deal with all that. It is no secret that hiring Alice, Clydette, Danny, Dawn, Jennifer, Joan, Kathy, Chris, Marika, and Michael were some of the best decisions I ever made. When I left in 2015, I wanted to leave on a high note, with the press in the black, a strong staff, and a reliable successor who could also acquire important new books. That is vitally important for a press like Illinois. My wish came true when Lori Matheson was appointed, and now it's her turn.
Gosh. Well, as you heard, I came to the press in 1996. I was a graduate student then, and I came to work on development with Judy McCullough. So it really, both of these directors really had a great impact on my development as a publisher, and really mentored me. So it's really very humbling to be on this panel with them. I have been at the press for quite a long time, but I'm kind of a neophyte as a director. I've been in the position just for 2.5 years, and I kind of crept into it a little at a time in a way. So I was sort of a soft entry. Came up through the ranks, took on progressively more responsibility over the course of 20 years. And so when I moved into the director position, I really felt not that I would come in with a brand new agenda and establish myself as superior to other staff members, but really come in as a peer, as an equal, and wanting to work side by side with the staff at the press. And I think that's really the most important aspect of my tenure so far, and I hope it will continue. That's certainly my intention. I think the strengths of the press, in its experience, in the variety of skills that the press staff bring to their tasks, really enable us to face the challenges that we have ahead of us. Bill has done quite a daunting and amazing job of cataloging the challenges that scholarly publishing is facing, and Illinois right along with all other scholarly publishers. And when the moment I took the chair, we encountered a new challenge, which was that the state was not able to come up with a budget. The legislature was not able to come up with a budget for the state. And that endured for 2.5 years, basically for the entire time that I've been the director until just a few months ago. That was obviously a very unnerving time, and I felt that the most important thing we could do was to continue doing what we do, moving forward as productively as we could, and really enabling people to have the support that they needed to just make sure that our priorities could continue in place and not be derailed by this legislative blockade or by administrative turnover, which also occurred. The vice president left just about the time he's hired me, and then he left, basically. And then we had a new vice president in the chair. Luckily, she came from within the university as well. And to be honest, I think one of the one of the benefits of the great turnover that we've seen at the University of Illinois recently is that it's provided a lot of opportunities for people within the university to take on new roles, and I think that's very valuable. And I think it's valuable for our staff as well, that as people are in their positions for quite a while, which many of our staff have been, that they have a chance to stretch and try out new skills and kind of grow into new kinds of expertise and just remain fresh in their jobs so that they can stay with us and not feel that they have to go someplace else to learn new skills or to expand their capacity. So I think the flexibility of the staff and just cultivating a creativity, really a belief in what we're doing, a sort of a shared sense of mission. I think that kind of internal coherence is very important in feeling that we are have a unified front facing these many challenges that confront us from the outside. But the other thing that's been very important, I think, in the last 2 years has been to expand our connections within the university. So at the same time that we're, in a way, turning inward and kind of giving each other a leg up day by day, we've really made a priority of connecting with other units on the campus and within the community, and trying to broaden our foundation of who our constituencies are. That work has been greatly enhanced by Julie's coming to the press, but so many staff have really come on board with her and me in taking the energy that it takes to step out into the community or to step out and present to various university constituencies, to talk about publishing, to talk about alternative careers, just to share our knowledge of publishing and the possibilities that it offers for young, talented people across the academy and the university. So I feel that certainly the challenges that we've heard about are continuing. Even over the past 6 months, we've continued to see library sales declining of specialized works. So certainly one of the challenges is to find books and journals that speak more broadly, that speak to more than one constituency, that speak sometimes even to non-specialists outside of the academy, so that we have some diversity in our portfolio, as they say in finance. So by diversifying our types of publication, by continuing to grow the journals program and have it so closely integrated with the books, I think is really such an important strategy for us. And Clydette and the journal staff have done such a wonderful job of identifying journals that have a crossover appeal to various strengths that we have on the book side. And we have this diversity in terms of reaching scholarly constituencies, local constituencies, and the university. Our regional list, I think, speaks very broadly to the Midwest and the state, and we're trying to strengthen our connections on the other campuses of the University of Illinois. So I think all of these, allowing for the strengthening and diversity of our staff, strengthening our connections and our partnerships and alliances, and just making more friends. That's what we need. People to understand what we do, so that if there comes a time when there's question from the administration, as there has been for some other presses, about the value of what the university press is supplying, that we answer, but we're not the only ones answering, that there are many other voices that are speaking to the ways that we contribute to scholarly conversations and communities. So let me stop there.
Do you have any questions? Oh, in the back there? Yes.
I wondered if each of you could sort of choose a favorite book that you acquired, or a book that you acquired that you didn't have high expectations for, that by the end, by the time it came out, gained sort of popularity beyond your expectations.
Well, I got a letter from a person who said he had a manuscript of 800 pages, which included 100 pages of single-space footnotes on Western history, on the migration to the West. And I told him that's going to have to be good to be published in that size. And gee, it was really, really good. The Plains Across won a half dozen awards, was a finalist for the Pulitzer, and got a front page review in the Washington Post by the leading Western historian. And so that was a book that Liz Delaney made a tremendous contribution to, because the author died on the operating table shortly after the book was accepted. And so that was a very tragic thing, but Liz did a great job of working on it editorially and being sure that it was all ready to go. And that is probably my idea of the best book that we published in my day.
Michael, this will not surprise you. The AIA Guide to Chicago Architecture, which I did not acquire by myself, although I'll take some of the credit for it. I had Michael, I had Jennifer join me to talk to the AIA committee about what we could offer, and they had questions that I would have fumbled with that these other people could answer very readily. And as a result, we became the publisher for the AIA chapter in Chicago, and I think that book's still doing well. So, yeah, that was fun.
Very well. Well, I'll mention a book that I had just a small part in acquiring. One of the great joys of my tenure at the press is that I was able to take on significant lists from Dick and also from Judy McCullough. And one of the books that she acquired, and really her fingerprints were on every page, literally, was Stephen Waite's book, The Beautiful Music All Around Us, which won an ASCAP award and won very high national media profiles and has done extremely well for us. Stephen is sort of a one-man promotion machine of his work. He's a tireless performer and just never met a person that he didn't want to tell about his book. And he's really a model for the way that we need our authors really to connect with their audiences, not to rely on us to do all the heavy lifting, but really rely on themselves as a link between the book and the reader. And he's just a master at that. The reason that book's so important, I think, is that he really tells the stories of ordinary people and why they matter. So he looks at particular performers who were in field recordings from the 1930s and 40s. So these were made when collectors with their recording equipment from the Library of Congress drove across the country in their pickup trucks and basically put out a call in the town square that anybody who knew songs of any type could come out and sing them into the machine and have them preserved that way. These were children on playgrounds or prisoners who knew work songs, or any 13 of these are in the book. So he went back to these places and found the people who had connections with these stories and these songs and documented them, and then also documented the tunes and talked about what happens when a tune goes from one person to another, which is just so much what our list is about, really. Music as a product of a community and a shared artifact that people have an influence on as they share it with each other. So that was really a privilege for me to work on that. Again, I really just came in, carried the baton for the last lap, but the race was being run long before I got involved with the project. And that's the case with so many books that we handle, that they're begun by one editor and then another editor takes them up, and sometimes even a different editor is the one who brings it to completion. So we really all rely on our predecessors and the ways that they make contacts, identify prospects for the press, and help us as a press as a whole bring them to publication. Questions?
Yes. You start first, and then you.
You guys have each talked about the changes that you saw during your time at the press. I'm wondering what changes you see for the future of the press and also for scholarly communication in general.
So the question is, what changes do we see for the future of the press and futures of scholarly communication? I might let others in the room chime in on this question as well, who are very knowledgeable. But certainly we're looking at technological changes that we can't really imagine. You know, a time when people will be consuming book content in ways that we haven't developed yet. All of our contracts say assign the rights to us to publish a work in all forms now known or here and after developed. So we really leave the door open for whatever technologies and forms present themselves. So that will be a big challenge for us to navigate those technological changes. And you know, there is also a question we haven't really talked about of various moves toward open access publication, meaning that books are published and then made available without cost. Well, there's a cost somewhere. That's really the rub. But available to access without cost. So the question is, where does the funding come from? You know, how do we cover the cost of producing that so-called free open access material? So that's a big question, I think, to be addressed.
Well, mostly this is her question. Dick and I can play poker.
Well, I am glad not to be dealing with the problems that she has now. The price you have to put on books is ridiculous. The number that you can print is just sad. And it's so hard now to get the libraries to buy the books. And the journals department is so much more important now, I think, than it was in my day, because it seems to me libraries are more likely to pick up journals and use and continue them with requests from the staff than they are to publish particular books that may or may not be needed. So that's important, but it's a tough time to be a university press publisher, I must say.
Well, I can think of two other things that are sort of perpetual that Lori's going to have to deal with. One is the change in academic disciplines. That's always happening. And it is a press's responsibility to be vigilant about what those changes are and how that's going to occur. The second change that I expect will occur is that presses will find patrons and need to find patrons and front load the expenses of publication. We were starting to do this when I departed, and we found this to be a very successful way to publish as long as we continue to use peer review. And the institutions or persons who are willing to patronize wanted peer review. That's why they would choose a press like Illinois. Plus all the other quality controls we had, from copy editing to production, all of that. And that's something that Illinois can successfully sell. That if you have a book project that deserves publishing, there is an audience waiting for it, and we're willing to pay for it as long as it's well done, then if a press can be first in line for that, or at least get an audition, then that is a revenue stream and a readership that had otherwise been ignored.
I do think Illinois has always, in the time that I've been there, and I think before too, really prioritized continuing to make books affordable to individuals. I think that's always been very important to us. I mean, it's the practice of presses raising the prices on their books beyond what individuals can pay has been going on, you know, all the time that we've been involved. But I think Illinois has really kept the lid on that, and it remains a priority. I think we really want our books to speak to individuals and have them be able to actually put the book in their hands. But one of the initiatives that has really been kind of a cornerstone for my work at the press, and Julie's with me, is to foster a stronger development program. We have Tony Pomonis here today, who's one of our contacts from the foundation. We have Dr. Norm Whitten here, who's one of our friends, our donors, and we're developing partnerships with donors, with societies that offer subvention programs, and soon we'll be rolling out a Friends of the Press program, which will be a membership type annual giving kind of a program. So all of these will help us bridge the gap between sales income and the costs of a book, and hopefully continue to keep our books accessible to the individuals that want to buy them. Clyde, you had a question?
Yeah, this is a question for Dick and Dr. Bill, not you so much, Laura.
Okay.
But no offense. Do you feel like during your tenure, was there anything that you wish you'd accomplished that you weren't able to accomplish?
I don't think that I left with that feeling. Maybe I just wasn't that ambitious.
I was sort of stung when we lost the relationship we had with Gislis. I thought there was no reason for that to have happened. And I don't think it was through any fault of the Graduate School in Library and Information Sciences. Now it's a different name.
High school.
See, I'm getting old. But losing that journal hurt.
Let me mention, because I've been planning to do this all along. The press publishes important books that are very significant and in the scholarly areas in which they're published. They're really appreciated. But once in a while, we publish a fun book. And one of these was a book called Pissing in the Snow and Other Ozark Folk Tales by Vance Randolph. This book was reviewed in the New York Times book review, but they couldn't spell out the whole title for some reason. But the title story is a pretty good one. Neighbor says to a farmer, "I don't want your boy hanging around my daughter anymore." And the farmer said, "Well, what's the problem? They get along fine." Yeah, no, I just want to keep him away. Well, what is it? Well, he spelled his name in the snow out behind the barn. And the farmer says, "Well, I mean," the neighbor said, "that's not that big a deal. What's the problem?" "Well, not that big a deal. You think I didn't know my daughter's handwriting?" And there's a lot of good stories in there. And is that still in print? That's a good one. I recommend it.
I'd just like to say that I copy edited that part. It was pretty short. It took one whole day, and by the time you'd read those for a whole day, it was totally an overdose. I have another question. Some of our journals are sponsored by learned societies, and some of our books have associations, at least tangentially, with learned societies. Given that academe is no longer populated largely by people like Jim Anderson, who went to graduate school and then got on the faculty and became permanent and so on, what do you see as the impact of learned societies in terms of how they can recruit people that cannot stay in academe or even aspire to make their way up? And is there anything about that will affect the future of sales in our subject areas or of our journals that are sponsored by such societies?
I think learned societies are making efforts to make room for more contingent faculty and to kind of make special provision for them and just broaden the idea of what a contributing faculty member is in terms of a society. I mean, it certainly is a concern. We do certainly rely on our partnerships. We publish a number of journals for society specifically. We have relationships with the American Bach Society and other organizations that we publish and distribute books for. And through those connections, we have access to the memberships of those groups in terms of alerting them about our books and journals, cross-promoting. Those are very, very valuable networks for us, certainly.
It was certainly happening during my tenure that MLA shrank. I think it was now something like a third its peak size. And that was a place where we showed off our books, we sold books, and that has certainly shriveled. But I can't be entirely despondent about it from my own experience, because this press has historically attended the smaller conferences and attended to the smaller societies, not the huge ones like chemistry or physics. And with those smaller ones, I found stability, and it's a great source for authors and great ideas, and there's loyalty. And because of our work with the books program, we were able to get journals. So I expect that's going to be, or continue to be, a vital part of press operations.
I was looking at that wonderful exhibit in the hallway out there, and if anybody hasn't seen it, that's a must see. And I was struck by the development of the appearance of books over the period of time. And that extends to the last 40 or 50 years, that a book from 1960 doesn't look like a book from 1980, doesn't look like a book from 2010. And as I was looking at all of those wonderful publications there, and I was thinking, well, how does that come about? Was that driven by external factors, developments in technology or printing materials, or are there internal decisions about design and presentation? And so I just wonder if you could all speak to how you personally witnessed that evolution as it took place. How much you feel you were an agent in that, or how much you feel well, whatever.
Well, it was always a matter of who was doing the designing, and if it changed over the years, I'm not sure that it got better, but there have been splendid designers working for university presses on staff and on freelance, doing freelance work. And one of them is here today, a young lady sitting over here, whose name I almost remember.
Cope Cumston.
Cope.
Dick hired me. I was always extremely grateful for that.
Sorry about that. But I haven't noticed a change over 30 or 40 years, and perhaps others have.
Well, I think so. Certainly the computerization of design was a big deal. And our designers made the most of it. Eventually, at first, computerization was dreadful. It was cheaper, but what you paid for, you got in ugliness. But eventually, the capabilities of Apple became good enough that designers could do pretty much what they wanted to. And I think it clearly got better when they had that additional capacity.
Cope, would you be willing to speak about that transition at all?
Well, it was definitely the Macintosh computer that did it. And you were at one of the presses. There's always been a tremendous design community in university presses, because the materials, the books are supposed to last. And they pass through many hands. And designers have always taken typography very seriously. And then the design, the jackets, that was kind of a revolution all of its own. That really has been building across all of publishing. But then University Press has really joined the marketing. Needed to market as much as the trade publishers did, and started investing in the covers in a way that they hadn't. And that's just been building and building, and you'll see, amazing things and University Press designers do them with great skill and great knowledge and great partners. So. And you can put in a plug for the book show will be on campus.
That's right. The Association for University Presses, our professional association, has a show every year, a traveling competitive show for book and jacket journal design. And that travels around to our press every year, and usually we host it right in our press building, which is rather a beat track. And this year we'll be partnering with the Krannert Art Museum and the Art and Design School to hold that show in the link gallery between the museum and the art department. So it's a very public, heavily trafficked space. A lot of students go through there. Cope was always very wonderful about connecting with the design faculty and having them bring their students to the press and using that as a teaching opportunity about graphic design and book design. And we're hoping that having the show in this central space will really foster that as well. So we're very excited about that.
I think we should mention a little bit about the earlier directors. The first one was a man named Cunningham, and he was secretary of the Board of Trustees as well, and they gave him this extra little thing to do. But probably the most prominent earlier director was Wilbur Schramm, who was a major force in communications theory. He was not only, he was not so much director of the press as he was head of the communications department, and I think for a time also head of the publicity department. And Schramm was a remarkable scholar himself who had books published all over that did extremely well. But he put out books that have lasted until this time, that have been reprinted about 20 times each. For instance, Four Theories of the Press, and Mathematical Theory of Communication by Osgood. These books are still to this day used and valued and printed whenever they run out. And a significant book published early, and probably in Schramm's time, was the Mars Project. Long before Sputnik, Werner von Braun, the German scientist, published a little book with the press that foresaw what was going to be happening far in the future. And I think that was a remarkable accomplishment to be able to publish that book. They also had a little book by Wendell Willkie, who some of you may remember was a politician. The press depended a great deal on the faculty for a long time, and the faculty in anthropology, in communication, in psychology, brought in significant books. Oscar Lewis published his early books here before going on to be a bestseller. And another person named Julian Stewart was extremely important scholar who published with the university. So they were able to deal very well with the people on campus. And that's extremely important because you never know what's going to come in otherwise. That's why we all develop series, I think, because you have a continuity that you otherwise don't have.
Other questions or comments? I did want to comment on the Gutman book that was published because it was an exciting time in American history, and I remember that so well. Stanley Ingerman from Rochester and Robert Fogel from the University of Chicago had co-authored an economic history of American slavery called Time on the Cross. And at the meetings of the Historical Association, it was the talk. And it came out at a time when the study of American slavery was exploding on the landscape of American social history. And everybody thought that this book would not only redefine the meaning of slavery, but would shift the method of inquiry to a quantitative analysis. And then Nearby published A Numbers Game by Herbert Gutman. And it was as though somebody pushed a reset button to say, nope. And it just shut it down. I mean, that book that came out of the press simply shut the whole discussion down. It had an amazing impact on the field. I don't know how you got the acquisition to do that one,
well,
but it's a book review.
I saw it in this journal, academic journal, and it was a long discussion, and I just thought, hey, that would make a nice book. And it did. And I thought it was a good stroke of genius to find that cartoon from the New Yorker that said, oh, this is not all that tough as you think it is.
And that was in the book. It was for everyone who had read the book. One of the mistakes they made, they did a quantitative analysis of how many whippings the average slave received from childhood to adulthood, and they had some fragmented evidence, and they quantified it as 0.71 or something like that. Common sense should have told them you don't get a 0.71 whipping. But then Gutman used that cartoon to really pinpoint that kind of analysis, say, you know, you should be comfortable that someday a historian will tell the public that you only got a 0.71 whipping. And it was just the right cartoon to symbolize the meaning of the book.
Yeah.
Okay, I think it's, yep.
So let's thank again Dick and Bill and Lori and Jim for joining us today.